Hey!
After all of that, few technical details.
Hmm.
Hmm.
We finally
Yes,
made it.
we do. And we thought we would jump on eventually after what, 40 minutes, an hour and 40 minutes, 50 minutes.
Yeah, we don't do
And
live.
yes, my technical knowledge, yes. So what we're talking about, Ali, is the myth busting on relationships, isn't it?
How are women fixed it after all?
Uh-huh.
Yeah, myth busting in relationships.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah,
Hmm. Yeah, and we're joined by our other one of our other directors today, aren't we?
we are indeed. Yes.
Yeah.
Beyond
See.
the cat.
Mhm. Hello. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right,
Yeah. So a couple of things that we've kind of come across is where people have been saying about, you haven't texted me back after 10 minutes or within 10 minutes sort of thing.
if they don't respond, then they're not worth it. Or yeah, and they're ghosting you when they're not.
Hmm. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
And it's that kind of time pressure thing to be on your phone constantly or be attending, when you're at work. When you finished work and you've got to log on like 11 o'clock at night to check emails and stuff, there's that time pressure constraint as well, which puts massive strain on people's relationships.
Huge, but we attribute value to that. We take a value judgment of it. So we literally think that, well, actually, therefore, if you haven't responded immediately, then you must not value me. So therefore, that I'm not going to value you back. And we end up making assumptions and responding as if we're slighted, hurt, or offended, when actually they might just be busy. Their phone might run out of battery, they might be stuck in a meeting that's means that they're not have access to the phone or it's not appropriate for them to respond. They might
Yes.
be driving somewhere and it's illegal for them to respond. Or they
Yeah.
might just have decided that they don't have to be in their phone 24 hours a day.
Well, and if they are driving somewhere, it could be through a dead spot. We don't get a signal at all. Bottom of a cave, you never know.
Don't forgive. Well, that is a valid sport. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think
So
the point we're trying to make is the lack of common sense and practicality
yes,
these
yeah,
days.
yeah. And this is also a roundabout as well, is that can create misunderstandings, can't it? Build up potential relationship resentments because, oh, you're not responding to me straight away.
Well, it also means that we miss out on potentially really enriching relationships from our life because we make snap decisions. Now, that's not to say that sometimes we shouldn't listen to our gut because sometimes that's really important. But the basis of what we use as the deciding factors, I think there's a lot of flaws in there and a lot of, or a lack of reality sometimes, and sometimes it needs a bit of a sense check.
Yes. And especially in the family environment or in the workplace, those misunderstandings can cause a huge amount of unnecessary upheaval and conflict.
Nothing escalates faster.
Yeah.
And so often, the one thing that's, you know, one of the most common pieces of feedback I give people, which resolves so many things, is have you asked them?
Hmm.
Did you let them know?
Well, yeah. People could have that proverbial make a man out of a molehill, isn't it? Maybe you've left something locked for so long, the outcomes can be worse than what it is.
Well, you and I were talking about this the other day, and I think sometimes it's also the almost the cultural stereotype of the British stiff upper lip. But that also means then that there's an assumption that we don't do emotions and we don't do awkwardness and it's all about politeness. What we're not suggesting here is that you are lacking in courtesy. What we're suggesting is you maybe need to get a bit more curious and ask more questions, ask better questions, because the questions you're asking just now and the decisions you're making because of the lack of questions, quite frankly, are atrocious.
Yep. And in our previous rehearsals, you were on about, are women better at expressing their emotions than what men are.
Yeah, and I'm also gonna caveat that and say this was a question that I posed you the other day,
Uh-huh.
and you said, "Why are you asking this?" I said, because I think it's the biggest load of hole come out.
Hmm. Yeah. And we come to kind of conclusion is this about trusts?
Mm.
And are you showing other people around you showing you that maybe you can't trust them with that vulnerability? Maybe it's a case of there's a certain people who you can and you trust with what you're saying or what you're going through at the moment. But there's other people who you wouldn't touch them with a barge pole, but they're okay to hang around and be friends with.
Well, I think it's also about recognizing that we all have different routes into things. It's it's like that simple question sometimes that people ask about how do you pick a meal from a restaurant menu? Some people will check the desserts first before they decide if they're having a starter. Some people will check the main courses first and then they will decide if they want a starter or a dessert. And some people will go to starters and desserts, decide they want those, and then look at a main course that can accommodate that. Some people will never have dessert but always go just purely for one thing.
Yeah.
Each of those is a different route into the same end result, which is a meal. None of them are wrong. They're all right for that person. And that boils down to those trusts, Rich. Part of those trusts is learning what that person's pathway is, taking the time to observe it and notice it.
Hmm. Whereas there's experiences, isn't it? Time
Mm-hmm.
over experience, isn't it? Something like that, where
Yeah,
you can work out people's patterns of behaviour.
yeah, because that was the other question I put you in the spot with was you do get an awful hard time from me sometimes.
You're not wrong.
You're like, oh, here's another question. Um, was what was it? How did you decide that actually you wanted to be friends with me? And don't get me wrong, I put myself in the spot too. I asked myself that question as well.
Day in, day out. Well, you have to with your abusive cat.
It's very coercive, yeah.
Yeah.
But what was really interesting was that your answer and my answer to that question, given the fact that men and women are meant to communicate really differently, was actually really similar in structure. We both were doing the same thing, which was we were observing the other person and their interactions with other people other than us.
Hmm.
And from that, we were then going, actually, I really like what I see. This is somebody that I would want in my circle.
Yes.
We came to the conclusion that, as you said, this is about trusts, how we establish or observe the capacity to trust, because it's almost like, is that person consistent with that? And do these behaviors match what they are or saying with me? And if they do, then I can invest my trust in that person in that part of that relationship
Hmm.
because there's consistency. But that also comes down to what's the person's capacity to communicate with me? How do they communicate with me? And I'm going to circle back to all these really crappy pieces of advice that says if they don't respond to you within 10 seconds, then they obviously don't value you. So therefore you should ghost them because, you know, you're a king or you're a queen or you're the alpha or you're the whatever or the, oh, God. Yeah, if I could take a social bomb to that lot, I would. Um, it's bollocks, Rich, utter
Uh-huh.
bollocks.
Yes. Well, as I said to you, is if you look at it, going back to hunting gatherers, if men weren't able to communicate when they went out hunting, they wouldn't come back with any game at all.
Well, but I also suggest that, you know, women went out hunting and gathering too. But the point is valid, is we've been communicating for a very, very long time. We have to, otherwise there wouldn't be a human race on this planet. Otherwise there wouldn't be technologies that we've got. There wouldn't be the extensions. But I think we've forgotten to notice how each of us communicate. And we look to those patterns, those 5 guides for knowing that this person values you, and we overlay it and think it's a universal truth, and it's not.
Yes. So that's by asking really good questions, isn't it? How do you know? How do you know you're in a healthy relationship? How do you know you're not?
And how clear have you been in terms of what you're actually saying?
Yeah. Well, wasn't it? There was offhand remark about, oh, I really like, I go and go and buy something. Somebody went out and bought these things for you instead.
Yeah, someday I was with,
Instead of thinking it was a hint to go and buy an item.
yeah, it's almost like the assumption that because I've mentioned that I have an intention to, at one point, I want to be able to purchase this. And that person took it as a hint, when actual fact, all it was me expressing a future aspiration, because the purchasing of it would indicate something else in my life. I didn't need them to do that for me, because the whole point of that was my capacity to do that for myself. The other great example is, I remember a friend of mine saying they were really frustrated because they did they didn't feel heard by their partner. They'd been out for a night, they came back and they'd said it was a lovely night, but they just wanted a cuddle. They didn't feel like getting intimate that night, but they wanted the closeness. And then the partner had misread it, so they felt as though there was a big gap. And I said, okay, so how did you tell them that's what you wanted? They went, definitely, I did. I most definitely did. I said, what did you say? Well, and they spent 10 or 15 minutes telling me about how they wrapped it up in I really love the closeness with you, and I love this and I love that. And, sometimes that's really nice and blah. And I got to the end of it and they went, so you can understand why I was so offended, because they hadn't listened to me. And I was like, can I just tell you something? I'm confused. And you never thought that maybe you just tell them? I'm like, they did. I
Mhm.
was like, I never heard those words in any of that. I didn't hear it in any of that. What I hear is window dressing and fluff and hints, but I don't hear what you want.
Yes. And that can lead to all sorts of problems. On the
Mm.
extreme end of things, I can't remember which book it was now, but it was about an aircraft that crashed into a mountain. It happened, I think it's a Korean Airways or something on those sort of lines. And due to social hierarchies, the captain wasn't he was going to head the plane into a mountain, but the co-pilot didn't directly tell him we need to start pulling up. It was all a roundabout pulling up, so he wouldn't offend the captain.
Mhm.
And it also unfortunately led to a loss of life.
Yeah.
So the Koreans had to readjust how they speak to on aircraft because of the dangerous nature of the situation.
And that's a classic example where what we're talking about here, these are just examples, but they apply in all areas of our life, whether that's in work, whether that's in our family, our friendships, or our close, intimate relationships. Those rules apply. Have you told them?
Yeah.
How have you put that across, and have you checked the understanding?
Or is it just a case of you want to play games with people?
Well, that very rarely gets good outcomes.
Hmm.
I think really where you and I are coming from in that is, actually, wouldn't the world be a better place if there was less gameplay and more really good positive communication? Because when you have that, you have better relationships.
Yeah. And finding out what people really mean. Because one of the biggest bugbears is active listening.
Mm.
And yeah, just parroting over what a couple of words, maybe a phrase or so, but not really trying to understand what the person's after. Building that curiosity within that relationship.
I think the intention in active listening is good. it's intended to sense check, but it doesn't always achieve that because it doesn't give you all of the tools you need to make sure you have the understanding. And it sometimes doesn't leave the space open for further information. So, for instance, like you and I, we have a set of agreements that we regularly update that help us have a good working relationship and friendship. And anytime we have a disagreement about something or things aren't that great, when we sit down and go, right, okay, what do we learn from that about each other? What do we need to do differently? What do we update in terms of our knowledge? And one of those is sometimes the fact that you and I both have the permission with each other to go, right, can you give me the context on that? Because I know I do, and I've seen some, or I've heard sometimes you do. We jump into a conversation halfway through and we don't give the initial starting thought for something, and then we wonder why the other person's going, huh? Where did this come from?
Mm-hmm.
And that's where both you and I have been known to say to each other, can you give me more context on that? What happened just before that? What led to that thought? Because otherwise, I don't know how to make sense of it.
Yes.
A really simple thing, but leads to a much better understanding. And that way, I don't get frustrated thinking I haven't been heard. You don't get frustrated thinking that I've missed the point, because the first thing we've done is check we've got all the information.
Well, as much as we can gather, yeah.
Yeah. Uh-huh. We're going to be probably doing quite a bit more of these shorts, looking at quick, simple things you can have a think about, you can do. We're going to be running some courses over the next few months as well, so keep an eye on that. And that way you've got a chance to work with us and get simpler, better outcomes. And that applies to your work, to your family, to your friendships, and to your close, intimate relationships as well. It's not rocket science when you know how.
Well, it makes life a lot easier, doesn't it?
Well, it doesn't have. Yeah.
Yeah, it's not rocket surgery.
Not rocket surgery.
Yeah.
Well, it makes things smoother, better,
Mhm.
faster to get solutions to. Yeah.
Yeah, avoiding that ambiguity and inferences.
Yeah. Better trusts, better
Yes.
boundaries.
And until next time,
Have a good day, and we'll speak to you soon.
cheers. Bye bye.